The answer to 1984 is 33 AD. Approximately. If you've done the research, you'll know that the Earth is a flat, level plane. The globe Earth model has now been completely disproved with all sorts of verifiable evidence that we've observed and scrutinised. Problem is, there's a few anomalies, and some flat earthers have attempted to explain weightlessness on the International Space Station with green screens, harnesses and zero-G planes.
Most of the inside shots are done in zero-G planes, and then some of the longer inside shots are done with a green screen and harnesses, so they just kind of float on a harness in front of a green screen.
Well, it's a good theory, but I'm going to quickly debunk it and move on. Zero-G planes give you a maximum of 1 minute in a gravityless environment, whereas this video on screen posted by ESA, that's the European Space Agency, it's 55 minutes in length, and you'll find long 15-minute segments of this video with no edits or cutaways at all, so that rules out zero-G planes. The green screen and harness theory doesn't work either, because you can't interact with a green screen and put your hands on the cargo in any kind of realistic way. Neither can you squeeze a harness through a tight tunnel, and I'm 99% certain it's not done with CGI. Okay, so how do they fake it? What I'm about to say is so outrageous that 9 out of 10 of you would think that I'm some sort of a kook. But I ask you to look at the evidence and decide for yourself. I'm not even certain I believe what I'm about to say. But I'm just throwing this out there because it's another option, and the green screen harness zero-G planes isn't really something that I can buy into. I'm saying the International Space Station is filmed on the ground. And even more than that the astronauts don't know they're on the ground and think that they're in space. I'm saying it's all like a big magic trick, and I'm going to do my best to show you how I think it all works. What I'm thinking is that the International Space Station is an anti-gravity device. The British Royal Air Force conceived the idea and built a workable levitating Harrier jet in the 1950s. And you might think, well, they can levitate a heavy plane, but they can't levitate anything else. Michael Faraday was levitating heavy metals like this 165 years ago. More about that later. Critics will say, well, they can levitate a plane and some heavy metals, but they can't levitate anything else. So what we have on screen here is a microacoustic anti-gravity device. In physics, you've got something known as the Kater's frequency. They knew about this over 200 years ago in the 1800s. If you get the sound frequency right, you can levitate particles like this and move them around. Pay attention to the wobble in these micro-miniature transistors. I'll come back to that in a moment. A small nut defies gravity. A matchstick, which is organic material, defies gravity. Other objects. And plastic. And finally, if water can defy gravity, and human beings are mostly made out of water, then guess what I'm thinking? Look at the size of this device. It's tiny. You can put your hand in there. Now, if I could build this on a bigger scale, so if you could imagine the International Space Station being roughly this size in comparison to what would be the gigantic acoustic harmonic devices surrounding it, then the space station itself and all the astronauts inside would be levitating, just like the elements you've just seen. You house the entire thing inside a giant aircraft hangar, because if I can think it and they've got the budget, then what's to stop them from experimenting with it? At this point, the critics will switch tactics and suddenly become the world's greatest experts in harmonics. In the comments below this video, they'll say, "You can't build that any bigger because of the oogie-boogie element in the waveform that prevents it from being scaled up." Nonsense. So, back to the wobble. You can see the waveform that the acoustic device creates. It shows up under supercooled nitrogen. And I imagine that a human hair might wobble a bit under waveform conditions. So is this why the lady on screen has Hold It Firm hairspray on? I might be wrong, but this lady's hair appears to be moving inconsistently with what I'd expect from zero gravity. So how on earth would I go about explaining away the International Space Station on the ground? You probably think it's an impossible task and can't be done. So if I was in charge of the space program and tasked with creating a realistic simulation, a globalist disinformation campaign to deceive people about the reality of the flat Earth we live on, and to scoop the budget, then I'd start by compartmentalising every aspect of the program so that not even the astronauts or the hired consultants or anybody knows what is actually going on. Let's start with the astronauts. I'd seek out the most suggestible people I could find. Don't think that suggestible people are dumb. No. You'll find tenured professors in the biology department who think we evolved from monkeys. And they believe it. That's because they are suggestible people who bought the lies and never questioned it. So I'd select 100 potential candidates, the wannabe astronauts, and I'd put them through lots of tests, medical, physical, written. And if any one of them was found to be an independent critical thinker, then I'd fail them on something like the medical test, and they'd be none the wiser. I'd hire the services of a psychologist or a team of psychologists who are skilled at hypnosis. I'd commission them to produce a detailed report about how willing the candidates are to go along with something without questioning it. And this would be the suggestibility report. There's lots of ways to test suggestibility. Show people a picture of random dots on a page and ask them if they can see the face. And if they do go along with it and they can see a face when there isn't one, then they are the person for the job. The psychologists don't even need to know that the candidates are potential space cadets. You pay them their fees, and they are none the wiser about the true nature of the report that they've compiled. Out of the 100 space candidates, you select the most suggestible one, because they're going to think that they've been in space when they haven't. Because if they think they've been in space, then they're less of a liability in the future. If they're in on the scam, then those astronauts would be a liability, and who knows what they might let slip in the future. So how do you convince an intelligent but suggestible astronaut that they've been in space? An impossible task, you might think. Well, it's been proven already in a British TV series called Space Cadets. It was aired on 10 consecutive nights in 2005. Charlie Skelton here, you may know him from the Bilderberg meetings which he covers for the Guardian newspaper.
It's Paul Joseph Watson with Infowars.com here at Bilderberg 2015 with the London Guardian's Charlie Skelton. Charlie, you got a friendly visit from the Austrian police last night. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, I wouldn't file it under friendly, but it was a visit.
He was one of the space cadets. He was a hired actor, the only one who knew it was a hoax, and it was his job to mess with the minds of the other space cadets who actually believed they were in space. You can watch the series on YouTube by searching this title at the bottom of the screen. It's an interesting few hours of psychology, so convincing an astronaut wannabe that they've been in space can and has been done. I watched it all, and it was very compelling psychology if you want to look up the series. So how do you simulate weightlessness? Michael Faraday could levitate heavy copper like this in the 1850s, German scientists took over from Michael Faraday and experimented with anti-gravity for the next 90 years. By the 1930s, Hitler's Germany had massively expanded upon the research into anti-gravity. There's rumours that Germany had perfected the ability to levitate a spacecraft. The speculation is that they were using electromagnetics like what Michael Faraday had used 100 years earlier. After the war in 1945, it's a well-known fact that in Operation Paperclip, thousands of Nazi scientists were taken out of Germany and relocated to the USA and Russia. Werner von Braun being one of them, he was instrumental in NASA's space program. With a $100 billion budget, can you imagine how far they've got with this technology today? Anti-gravity devices come in lots of different forms. In its most simplistic form, you can see from the video here that if you pass a neodymium magnet through a copper tube, it becomes weightless. Turn the copper tube on its side, trapping the magnet in, and you've got complete weightlessness. If I had the budget, I'd experiment with neodymium weaved into the fabric of the clothing that the astronauts wear. But I think that the acoustic design offers the best realistic example of a scaled up device that could defy gravity. But if you're thinking that's a bit of a stretch, then they did and do have the budget, and Operation Paperclip ensured thousands of scientists were working on this project. If the magnetic or harmonic devices didn't produce the best results, then as we can see here, they were experimenting with gimbal devices in the 1950s. Supermassive gimbal devices that somehow simulated a primitive form of horizontal weightlessness under the right spin conditions. This footage we see here from the 1980s roughly approximates the size of the gimbal device we've just seen. And if they had the ability to build a massive space station with tons of room to swing about in the 1980s, then why are they scrabbling about on their knees on the ISS in 2015? Critics will say, anti-gravity devices, that's ridiculous. But what you're looking at here is an anti-gravity device. Whether it's filmed on the ground or in space, it's still a device that defies gravity. So, you build a gigantic aircraft carrier and paint the inside black. You put the gimbal, magnetic, harmonic, anti-gravity, whatever device in the middle of the aircraft hangar, then you send a military aircraft up to a high altitude to film the Earth and clouds. And you film it with a fisheye lens, which are commonly found in GoPro cameras, which bend and curve the image like this. You send that footage back to the hangar and project it onto the wall. So it would resemble something similar to an IMAX cinema. So when the astronauts look out of the window, they think they're looking at the Earth from space, but it's not. It's just an IMAX theatre. 1.7 million people tuned in to watch this video about a 3,000 mile wide UFO caught over the Earth. Or is it just the bulb on the projector that's blown? And how do you convince them that they've been in a rocket? Well, you lead the suggestible crew up a long flight of stairs with no windows. The staircase would be directly underneath the aircraft hangar. Tell them it's the staircase to the top of the rocket, load them on a simulator like this one, jostle them around for half an hour, then dock the flight simulator with the anti-gravity device, let them scrabble through the hatch, and hey presto, they think they're in space. But how do you get them back down to Earth? Well, you cram them into a tight escape pod with no windows in it, load them on the back of an aircraft, and dump them 40 or 50 miles out to sea. And then they get a hero's welcome. Is any of that possible? Or is this just my imagination? The general public think there's no such thing as anti-gravity, yet when you search YouTube for things like levitation, you find all sorts of real-world examples, more than I could ever fit in this video. But if the general public are suggestible enough to believe in evolution, then they're suggestible enough to believe that this can only be done in space. So the space agencies command hundreds of billions of dollars in funding. It's a business because we get a fake photoshopped image of Pluto, they get to keep the money. It's a genius business plan, so lucrative that all governments are involved. So what I've said in this video is a bit kooky, somewhat tinfoil hat type stuff. I've got no evidence, just an inquiring mind. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you'd like to see 25 flat geocentric Earth claims that rocked my worldview, then you can click on the left. There's a mystery video on the right. If you're unable to click the screen, then you can see under the video for the links. I'm Tiger Dan, God bless you all, and remember, the answer to 1984 is 33 AD. Approximately.